Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Mysterious Invitation. Hercule Poirot sat comfortably in his modest London apartment, the morning sun casting a gentle glow across the polished surfaces. The delicate ticking of his small silver clock was the only sound to accompany his thoughts, save for the occasional faint rumble of traffic outside. In one hand, he held a cup of steaming coffee, in the other, a freshly arrived letter. Its unusual weight and the crimson wax seal immediately caught his attention. Poirot studied the envelope carefully. The seal bore an intricate crest, unfamiliar to him, yet executed with evident refinement. He turned it slowly between his fingers, as one might examine a rare jewel, appreciating the subtle artistry. The handwriting was elegant, written in flowing cursive with an exactness that suggested both education and refinement. Even in something as simple as penmanship, Poirot believed, a great deal could be revealed about character. He broke the seal with care, ensuring not a single fragment of wax was wasted. The paper inside was thick and creamy, heavy with understated quality. As he read, his small grey cells, the precise mechanism of his extraordinary intellect, began to stir with intrigue. The letter was from Lady Winifred Garrick, a name Poirot did not recognize, though the title Ladies immediately signified social prominence. She was inviting him to Garrick Manor, an ancestral home in Surrey, for a masquerade ball to be held the coming Saturday. The wording, Poirot noted, was unusually personal. It suggested that his presence was not merely for entertainment, but that he might be of assistance in ensuring the evening proceeds without incident. Poirot smiled faintly at the phrasing. Subtlety and decorum were hallmarks of the upper classes, yet there was an undercurrent of urgency beneath the polite veneer. Poirot's instincts, honed over decades of observing human behavior, whispered that the invitation masked some problem, a mystery awaiting resolution. I must say, my friends, the handwriting alone suggests a mind both cultured and precise, Poirot murmured to himself, straightening the letter carefully before placing it upon his immaculate desk. He reflected upon the importance of first impressions, particularly in matters of investigation. One could learn much from a letter, the choice of words, the rhythm of sentences, even the spacing between lines, all spoke volumes about the sender. By mid-afternoon, Poirot had arranged for a taxi to convey him to Surrey. The countryside was beginning to shed its autumnal hues, golden leaves drifting lazily along the lanes. From the carriage window, Poirot observed the world with his usual intensity. Every detail, an overgrown hedge, a faint trail of mud on the road, a fox darting through the underbrush, was filed meticulously in his mind. Nothing escaped his notice, for, as he often reminded himself, the smallest detail is often the key to understanding the largest enigma. As the taxi drew nearer to Garrick Manor, perched atop a gentle hill and shrouded by the first hints of evening mist, Poirot's attention sharpened. The building was impressive, a stately home of grey stone with turrets rising into the pale sky. Windows glimmered faintly in the fading light, suggesting the presence of guests within, their laughter and conversation carried faintly on the crisp breeze. Yet Poirot's practiced eye noted imperfections, a slight discoloration in one of the stones near the main entrance, a crack running along a side window, and a faint trace of mud beside the servants' entrance. Even such minor anomalies spoke to him of human activity, care, or neglect, and potentially, secrets. Upon arrival, the taxi deposited Poirot at the grand double doors. A uniformed footman, standing at rigid attention, opened the doors with the air of one performing a sacred duty. Poirot's eyes took in the interior with immediate precision. A polished marble floor reflecting the warm light of a crystal chandelier, velvet draperies in rich burgundy, and a sweeping staircase that promised grandeur yet suggested careful maintenance. He noticed the maid, carrying a silver tray of refreshments, and the subtle tremor in her hands. Small observations such as this were rarely accidental, Poirot knew. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," said a voice, refined yet edged with tension. Lady Winifred Garrick herself appeared, resplendent in a gown of deep emerald, her posture impeccable, though her eyes betrayed a hint of worry. "I am delighted you accepted my invitation. Please, come in." Poirot inclined his head in polite acknowledgement, bowing with elegance. "Madam, it is my pleasure. Yet I perceive in your words, one certain apprehension." His French, softly pronounced, carried the subtle emphasis of a man accustomed to detecting emotion through language. Lady Winifred smiled faintly, a mixture of politeness and unease. I confess," she said carefully, "that I hoped your presence might ensure that all unfolds without incident. There have been certain tensions recently among my guests, matters that I would prefer handled discreetly." Poirot nodded, taking note of her phrasing and the slight quiver in her gloved hands. Tension among guests, he reflected, could indicate anything from personal rivalries to matters far more dangerous. He murmured. "It is often in moments of gaiety, under the masks and music, that the true nature of people is revealed. I shall observe." As evening fell, the manor buzzed with preparation for the masquerade. Servants moved with quiet efficiency, carrying trays of crystal glasses and silver candelabras. Poirot wandered briefly through the corridors, his gaze capturing each subtle detail, a slightly ajar door leading to the garden. Footprints in the marble dust near a side entrance, a faint perfume lingering in the air not matching the lady of the house. He made silent mental notes, aware that even these minor observations might prove significant in the days to come. Later, in his room, Poirot unpacked his own attire for the ball, a meticulously tailored dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a carefully folded cravat. Every item, he knew, contributed to his presence. Appearance, like observation, could influence human behavior. As he arranged his ensemble, he reflected upon the evening ahead. Masquerade balls were rife with opportunity for deception, hidden motives, concealed identities, subtle manipulations. Yet Poirot welcomed such challenges, they allowed his small grey cells to function at their highest capacity. As the last light of day faded, Poirot stood by the window, gazing upon the mist-shrouded gardens of Garrick Manor. Somewhere among the gilded halls and masked guests, tension simmered. Somewhere, beneath the polite laughter and whispered conversation, a problem awaited his attention. And Poirot, ever patient, ever precise, would uncover it, one careful observation at a time. Thus concluded the first steps of a journey that promised mystery, danger, and the subtle art of deduction. For Poirot, the evening was not merely an invitation to a ball, it was an invitation to reveal truth hidden beneath elegance, masks, and the smallest details of human behavior. And with that certainty, Hercule Poirot smiled ever so slightly, his mind alight with curiosity and anticipation. Chapter 2: Shadows Among the Guests. The evening of the masquerade arrived in all its grandeur. Outside, the Surrey countryside lay in the quiet embrace of autumn twilight, with mist curling like delicate smoke along the manicured lawns of Garrick Manor. Inside, the great hall blazed with light from crystal chandeliers, reflecting in the polished marble floors. Guests arrived in elaborate costumes and masks, each vying to conceal identity while revealing taste and refinement. The air was rich with music from a string quartet, mingling with the soft murmur of conversation and the occasional peal of laughter. Hercule Poirot entered quietly, his tall frame and impeccable attire immediately commanding attention. His dark suit, crisp white shirt, and perfectly folded cravat contrasted subtly with the flamboyance of others, and his small grey cells were already at work. Each movement, each gesture, each glance from the guests was recorded and catalogued in his mind, forming a precise mental map of potential suspects, allies, and intrigues. Poirot's first observation, as always, was one of posture and behavior. Lady Winifred Garrick, radiant in her emerald gown, stood near the grand staircase, receiving guests with an elegance bordering on ceremony. Yet Poirot noted the slightest tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked repeatedly toward the far end of the hall. Something worried her deeply. Subtle nervous energy, he reflected, often betrayed matters one would prefer to conceal. Among the guests, a young man in a black velvet cloak drew his attention, Mr. Adrian Forsyth, whose finely tailored mask could not conceal the rapid movement of his eyes. Flicking from one guest to another, Poirot observed how his fingers fidgeted with a cameo brooch pinned to his cloak, the action repeated several times with barely perceptible hesitation. Nervousness, he decided, though he could not yet determine its cause. Was it guilt? Fear? Anticipation? All possibilities, he considered carefully. Nearby, Miss Vivienne Caro, a renowned stage actress, circulated among the guests with effortless charm. Her eyes, however, betrayed a calculating scrutiny. She studied doorways, glances cast toward servants and exits, as though she were measuring not the room but the people within it. Poirot, noting this, made a mental file. Actors, by profession, often understood performance and deception better than most. It was a skill that could be valuable, or dangerous, in matters of intrigue. A group of older guests, all members of the local gentry, seemed to occupy the center of the hall. They laughed and gestured, speaking in the confident tones of those accustomed to authority. Poirot listened discreetly, catching snippets of conversation, hints of financial disputes, murmurs of family rivalries, and veiled remarks about a certain Sir Reginald Thorn, whose name carried weight among all assembled. The mention of his name piqued Poirot's curiosity. Who, exactly, was Sir Reginald, and why did his presence, or absence, elicit such careful whispers? Poirot's attention then shifted to the staff. A tall, thin footman moved with precise efficiency, but Poirot noted the subtle tremor in his hands as he carried trays of champagne. A maid lingered near the side entrance, her gaze flitting toward the garden in a manner that suggested more than casual interest. These small details, seemingly trivial, often revealed truths overlooked by the unobservant eye. Even the positioning of the staff, their movements, their hesitations, spoke of tension beneath the polished surface of the evening. As the night progressed, Poirot observed the subtle interactions between guests. Mr. Forsyth attempted conversation with several women, yet each time he smiled, it did not reach his eyes. His movements were hurried, distracted, and Poirot noted that he avoided the library, a room at the far end of the hall, with an almost palpable reluctance. Miss Caro, meanwhile, seemed to gravitate toward him on several occasions, though her attention was never fully fixed. Was she probing, testing, or merely curious? Poirot made no assumptions, he only recorded. The music shifted to a waltz, and the dance began. Guests moved in elegant patterns, swirling masks and flowing gowns creating a dazzling visual display. Poirot watched, noting the subtle tensions in each interaction. One couple's grip was too firm, betraying impatience or irritation. Another's gestures were overly measured, rehearsed, as though concealing emotion beneath calculated civility. Every movement was a clue, every smile a potential deception. Poirot's gaze returned to Lady Winifred. She mingled with a gentle courtesy, yet frequently glanced toward a shadowed corner near the grand staircase. There, a tall figure remained largely unobserved, a foreign gentleman, masked still firmly in place, eyes alert and calculating. Poirot's instincts told him that this guest was not merely enjoying the entertainment, he was a watcher, a participant in a drama unseen by most. His presence was an anomaly, and Poirot made careful note of the time and nature of his movements throughout the evening. As the night deepened, Poirot found opportunity to speak quietly with Lady Winifred. In the relative privacy of the drawing room, she revealed fragments of information. Recent disagreements among the guests, a certain financial dispute, and a subtle undercurrent of anxiety among her staff. She mentioned Sir Reginald Thorn, a wealthy industrialist who would be arriving later, whose presence, she admitted, had caused concern among some attendees. "He is formidable," she said softly, almost a whisper. And some say he can be dangerous in his dealings. Poirot's interest sharpened. Danger was rarely accidental, and the atmosphere he had observed all evening suggested that a threat might already be present. Returning to the main hall, Poirot's attention was drawn to a minor disturbance. Mr. Forsyth had inadvertently brushed against a server carrying a tray, causing a faint spill of champagne. Forsyth's reaction was almost imperceptibly sharp, and the server's hands trembled slightly, more than the spillage warranted. Poirot noted the look exchanged between Forsyth and the masked foreign gentleman, quick, guarded, and full of unspoken meaning. Subtle, yet significant. By the conclusion of the evening's formalities, Poirot had observed numerous curious behaviors, guests avoiding certain areas, repeated glances exchanged behind masks, whispered consultations with the staff. He had filed each observation in his mind, knowing that the smallest detail, overlooked by others, would later illuminate the truth. Masquerades, he reflected, were particularly fertile ground for deception. Masks concealed not only faces but also motives, intentions, and secrets. Yet Poirot, ever patient, would penetrate all illusions. Before retiring for the night, Poirot paused at a window overlooking the garden. The moon had risen, casting silver light upon the dew-kissed grass. The grand estate, which by day seemed serene and orderly, now felt like a stage upon which invisible dramas played out. He could sense undercurrents of fear, ambition, and concealed desires, all swirling beneath the polished veneer of gaiety. Poirot knew, with the certainty that had never failed him, that something significant would occur in the days ahead. Perhaps a revelation, perhaps a confrontation, but certainly an event that would test his powers of observation, logic, and psychological insight. For now, the masquerade had provided him with the first pieces of a puzzle, delicate yet crucial. Each glance, gesture, and word had been a thread, to be woven together in the tapestry of discovery to come. As the last guests departed and the manor fell into quiet, Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. "Oh, Miss Amos," he murmured softly, adjusting his cravat with practiced precision, "the evening has been instructive. Soon, we shall see how the threads intertwine, and which secrets shall be revealed. Patience, patience, tout vient à point à qui sait attendre." And with that, Hercule Poirot, master of observation, subtle deduction, and the small grey cells, retired to his chambers, his mind already alight with questions, theories, and the first delicate contours of the mystery that would unfold in the days ahead. Chapter 3: A Disturbing Discovery. The morning after the masquerade arrived with a chill that seemed to penetrate the very walls of Garrick Manor. A soft mist clung to the lawns, curling around the hedges and fountains like ghostly fingers. Inside, the grand house was unnervingly silent. The echo of the previous evening's laughter had vanished, replaced by an uneasy stillness. Hercule Poirot, ever precise in his routine, had breakfasted lightly in his room, observing through the window as servants went about their tasks with a careful vigilance that suggested unease. He noted, with his usual precision, the tension in their movements, the slight tremor of a hand adjusting a tray, the nervous glance over a shoulder, the muted whisperings that ceased when anyone approached. "Curious, très curieux," Poirot murmured. The smallest ripple in behavior may presage the largest wave. His thoughts were interrupted by a hurried knock at the door. A footman, pale and clearly distressed, entered. "Monsieur Poirot." "Lady Winifred, she wishes you in the library at once." "There has been an incident." Poirot's expression remained calm, yet a spark of curiosity lit his eyes. He followed the footman with measured steps, noting every detail of the corridor, the subtle scratches along the wooden floor, a faint smudge on a carpet runner, a vase slightly askew, as though moved in haste. Each anomaly was a potential clue. Upon reaching the library, Poirot found Lady Winifred standing beside the Persian rug, her hands clasped tightly before her. The air was thick with tension, scented faintly with the rich perfume of her gown mingling with something sharper, almost acrid, that Poirot immediately recognized as unusual. On the floor lay a man, Sir Reginald Thorne, the wealthy industrialist whose name had rippled quietly through the conversations of the previous evening. He was motionless, his face frozen in an expression of horror, eyes wide and unseeing. A half-empty glass of red wine rested nearby, a delicate silver candlestick toppled beside it. Poirot knelt carefully, approaching the body with a methodical precision that seemed almost ritualistic. "Madam," he said softly, "please step back a little. It is imperative that nothing be disturbed before the proper observations are made." He examined the body with the practiced eyes of a man who had long studied death and its myriad disguises. There were no visible wounds. No signs of struggle. Yet the position of the body, the tension in the limbs, and the look upon Sir Reginald's face suggested sudden terror. Poirot inhaled gently, noting a faint, bitter odor lingering in the air, a subtle but distinctive clue. Something had been introduced into his system, he deduced. Poison, perhaps, though which kind and how delivered remained uncertain. His gaze swept the room, cataloguing every detail. A small book lay open on a nearby desk, the pages untouched. A chair had been slightly moved from its usual position. The window to the garden was ajar, though the lock appeared undisturbed. Poirot's mind raced, quietly assembling possibilities: accident, self-inflicted, or murder. Each scenario carried implications, but he would not act hastily. Patience and precision were required. Lady Winifred's voice trembled as she spoke. I cannot believe it. Sir Reginald, here, in my home." Her hands fluttered briefly toward her face before she clasped them again. Poirot noted the fine details of her expression: worry. Yes, but also fear tinged with recognition. She knew the risk had been present, she had perhaps anticipated it in some vague, instinctive manner. Poirot's attention shifted subtly to the room itself. The Persian rug, though beautiful, bore faint impressions, indicating recent movement. The glass of wine, partially consumed, was a potential vector. He noted the positioning of the toppled candlestick. Its fall had been incidental, yet it created a natural diversion. Someone had orchestrated the scene, if only partially, to suggest an accident. A faint scratching sound drew Poirot's attention. He looked toward the fireplace. There, almost invisible, was a small residue on the hearth, tiny flecks of a powdery substance, light in color, previously unnoticed. He filed it carefully in his mental notes. Substances, however minor, were often crucial. Poirot spoke gently to the staff, who had now gathered in small clusters, whispering anxiously among themselves. "Has anyone approached the room prior to my arrival?" he asked. The footman hesitated, then shook his head. "No, monsieur. Only we, the household staff, discovered this." Poirot nodded, though inwardly he remained cautious. False statements, even subtle ones, were as revealing as truth when observed carefully. He turned to Lady Winifred. "Madam, may I inquire if Sir Reginald had any disagreements with anyone yesterday evening? Any tension that might merit consideration?" She hesitated, glancing toward the door, then lowered her voice. "There were disputes, minor arguments. Sir Reginald was never one to hide his opinions. Some of the guests were uneasy in his presence. But I cannot imagine that anyone would harm him." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Human nature, he reflected, often concealed danger behind layers of civility. A masquerade ball, with its masks and hidden identities, could provide the perfect cover for such actions. He had noted nervous gestures, furtive glances, and restrained movements among several guests, clues now more significant than ever. Walking carefully around the body, Poirot considered the broader picture. Sir Reginald had been a man of influence, and influence often breeds envy, resentment, and fear. Was the motive financial? Personal? Political? Each possibility demanded careful scrutiny. The guest's statements, gestures, and interactions would reveal far more than outright testimony. Poirot's examination of the wine glass proved particularly telling. The faint bitter odor persisted, subtle but distinct. He considered its placement, conveniently near the body, easy to access, yet unassuming. Whoever had done this had knowledge, intelligence, and a measure of audacity. The methodical delivery of the toxin, perhaps via the wine or some other medium in the room, suggested premeditation. He made his observations known with deliberate calm. "Madam, it is imperative that all guests remain available for questioning. Any interference may obscure the truth. The smallest detail, footprints, gestures, items moved, may be of profound importance." Lady Winifred nodded, pale but composed. Poirot's authority, understated yet absolute, reassured her, even in the midst of terror. Poirot then directed his attention to subtle traces left behind, a slight indentation near the carpet's edge, indicating hurried movement, a faint, lingering scent of perfume not belonging to Lady Winifred, a misplaced letter on the desk. Each detail, when examined together, suggested deliberate orchestration rather than coincidence. Finally, Poirot allowed himself a moment to reflect, seated quietly in an armchair opposite the rug. The puzzle was forming, delicate threads intertwining, the tension among the guests, the precise delivery of the toxin, the subtle signs of hurried manipulation within the room. Each observation, while minor in isolation, contributed to a larger tapestry, a tapestry he would unravel with patience, precision, and the unparalleled work of his small grey cells. As the local constable arrived, flanked by uniformed officers, Poirot maintained a polite detachment. He allowed them to perform their duties while he silently catalogued inconsistencies in their approach, the assumptions they carried, and the details they were likely to overlook. He knew that official investigations often missed subtleties that he could perceive. And as the day wore on, with guests gradually gathered and questioned, Poirot remained serene, almost impervious to the shock and distress around him. The pieces of the puzzle were appearing, though in fragments. And Poirot, ever the patient observer, was confident that these fragments, carefully examined, would eventually reveal the full, astonishing truth. For now, the first act of the mystery had concluded, a man dead, a house of whispered secrets, and an intricate web of human motives stretching beneath the surface. Yet Poirot knew, as he always did, that the smallest detail, the tiniest observation, would prove the key to unraveling the enigma. And he would uncover it, with his characteristic elegance and brilliance, in the days to come. Chapter 4, Secrets Unveiled. The morning following Sir Reginald Thorne's tragic demise brought a pall over Garrick Manor. A mist clung stubbornly to the grounds, lending the estate an otherworldly quiet. Inside, the grand halls echoed only with the soft footsteps of those moving carefully, as though afraid to disturb the delicate balance of suspicion that now enveloped the household. Hercule Poirot, ever composed and impeccably attired, moved methodically through the manor, his small grey cells already at work. Each corridor, each room, each subtle shift in the air could provide vital information. The previous day's observations, the anxious glances, the nervous gestures, the furtive movements of certain guests had already begun to form a framework in his mind. Now, he needed to delve deeper to uncover the hidden motives that lay behind polite facades. He began with Lady Winifred Garrick herself. She received him in her sitting room, an elegant space lined with books and portraits, heavy velvet curtains drawn against the autumn light. Poirot noted immediately the slight tremor in her hands, the careful control of her breathing. "Madam," he began gently, "I must inquire further into the relationships between your guests and the unfortunate Sir Reginald. There are subtleties which, if ignored, may obscure the truth." Lady Winifred hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Sir Reginald, he was not without enemies. Not in any blatant sense, but there were tensions, rivalries, matters of business and family. Mr. Forsyth, for example, had an argument with him regarding a recent investment. And Miss Caro, she was concerned about a financial scandal involving her own family, which Sir Reginald might have exposed. Her voice faltered slightly. I had hoped it would remain private, but perhaps someone acted before they should have. Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly with the satisfaction of confirmation. Human nature, he reflected, often revealed its most dangerous aspects when ambition or fear were involved. He made careful notes of every word, every hesitation. Timing, tone, and the micro-expressions of the speaker were as telling as explicit statements. Next, Poirot sought Mr. Adrian Forsyth. The young man had been nervously observed during the masquerade, his fidgeting and avoidance of certain rooms particularly noteworthy. Poirot found him in a small conservatory, staring at the autumn rain trickling down the glass panes. Monsieur Forsyth, Poirot began with polite formality, may I ask you to recount your movements yesterday evening? I require a clear and precise account, without omission. Forsyth's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them before him. I spent most of the evening in conversation. I avoided some areas, yes. But I assure you, I had no reason to harm Sir Reginald. His gaze flitted toward the window, then back to Poirot. We argued briefly over an investment. I admit that. But I would never resort to murder. Poirot inclined his head slightly, noting the subtle micro-expressions, the quick blink, the slight tightening of the jaw. These were indicators, not proof, yet they were threads to follow. Indeed, monsieur. Yet even arguments can offer insight into motive. Tell me, who else might have had cause to resent Sir Reginald? Forsyth's lips pressed into a thin line. Many, he admitted reluctantly. People in his business circle, certainly. Some of the guests here. Lady Winifred, perhaps unknowingly, has drawn together a number of people whose interests conflict with his. But I do not know who would go so far as this. Poirot filed this away, noting the young man's honesty tempered by careful concealment. It was consistent with someone fearful, yet not guilty, though he would need to verify all statements against other accounts. Next, Poirot approached Miss Vivienne Caro, the actress whose presence at the ball had seemed more strategic than social. She was in the drawing room, examining a mirror with deliberate care, adjusting the folds of her gown. Poirot observed her posture, the slight furrow of her brow, the subtle tapping of her fingers against the table. Miss Caro, he began, I understand you were acquainted with Sir Reginald through financial matters affecting your family. Might you clarify the nature of these concerns? She turned to him, a practiced smile upon her face, though her eyes were alert and calculating. Sir Reginald had opinions about how my family managed certain assets, she said carefully. Opinions which I found inconvenient. But I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, that my disagreements were purely personal. I would not harm him. That is unthinkable. Poirot studied her for a long moment. Her gestures were controlled, her words precise, yet there were inconsistencies, the way she emphasized certain phrases, the occasional overcorrection of tone. Curious, he murmured under his breath. Every word, every gesture, tells a story. He made mental notes of these inconsistencies, aware that they could become crucial when piecing together the puzzle. As the morning wore on, Poirot continued his methodical inquiries, speaking with each guest and member of the staff. The foreign gentleman, who had remained largely unobserved at the ball, was evasive in conversation, his replies carefully measured, avoiding unnecessary disclosure. Servants whispered among themselves, revealing hints of arguments between Sir Reginald and others, subtle exchanges of letters, and small incidents of jealousy and rivalry. Poirot's genius lay not merely in collecting statements, but in observing what was not said. He noted the guests' hesitations, the slight changes in posture, the nervous gestures. Each omission was a potential clue. He observed that some guests avoided certain topics entirely, while others overcompensated with unnecessary detail. These behaviors, he knew, were as revealing as any confession. By mid-afternoon, Poirot gathered his thoughts in the library. The threads of the mystery were forming a pattern. Sir Reginald had indeed been a man of influence, commanding respect and, naturally, resentment. Conflicts over financial matters, personal grievances, and professional rivalries were evident among multiple guests. Several had the motive, yet none had yet presented incontrovertible evidence of action. Poirot allowed himself a quiet reflection, pacing the room slowly, observing the arrangement of furniture, the position of windows, and the subtle signs of disturbance from the previous day. The Persian rug, now carefully preserved, still bore traces of hurried movement. The wine glass, faintly scented with an unusual odor, remained in place. Each piece of the scene was a fragment of a larger tableau, waiting for the proper arrangement to reveal the truth. Finally, Poirot sat at his desk, spreading out a small collection of notes and observations. He examined them carefully, one by one: Forsyth's nervousness, Caro's controlled gestures, Lady Winifred's subtle anxiety, the foreign gentleman's evasions, and the staff's quiet whispers. Each, he concluded, was a thread. And by following each thread with patience and precision, he would begin to weave the full tapestry of this complex intrigue. He reflected on the nature of human behavior. People, he knew, could mask anger with politeness, ambition with charm, and fear with grace. Yet there were patterns, small, often imperceptible, but consistent. Gestures repeated unconsciously, phrases delivered in a certain tone, glances that lingered too long. These were the breadcrumbs that led to truth. As the day drew to a close, Poirot resolved to continue his investigations the following morning. The interviews had unveiled motives, hinted at rivalries, and revealed the tension simmering beneath polite facades. Yet the full picture remained incomplete. Patience, observation, and the keen application of his small grey cells would be required to untangle the intricate web surrounding Sir Reginald Thorne's untimely death. And so, Hercule Poirot, with his characteristic calm and elegance, prepared to confront the next stage of the mystery, uncovering not just who had motive, but who had the opportunity and cunning to commit the deed. For now, the threads were visible, delicate yet persistent. And Poirot knew, with quiet confidence, that when woven together, they would reveal a truth both astonishing and inevitable. Chapter 5: The Poisoned Mask. The day following Sir Reginald Thorne's death was heavy with quiet tension. Garrick Manor, once vibrant with the laughter of masquerade guests, now resembled a house held in suspense, each room echoing with whispers of speculation and fear. Hercule Poirot moved with his usual elegance and measured calm, his keen eyes sweeping the hallways, cataloguing every detail. He was fully aware that the greatest mysteries often hid in the smallest details, and that the devil, as always, was in the minutiae. Poirot began the day with a visit to the scene of the death, the Grand Library, still preserved exactly as it had been found. He examined Sir Reginald's wine glass once again, the faint bitter odour lingering despite careful cleaning attempts by the staff. Poirot's small grey cells worked methodically, recalling the smallest elements of the previous evening: the toppled candlestick, the minor scuffs on the Persian rug, the slight smudge near the fireplace, and the glass's precise placement near the body. The breakthrough came as he considered a seemingly trivial detail: the masquerade masks worn by guests. Each mask, Poirot realized, had been distributed by the household prior to the evening. And one mask in particular, a crimson mask adorned with delicate gold embroidery, was of a unique make, separate from the others. It had been sent specifically to Sir Reginald. The idea struck Poirot like a lightning bolt. "Ah, Miss Amos," he murmured softly, pacing the room. "The mask, it is the instrument of our tragedy." Poirot requested the mask be brought to him. When examined closely, it appeared perfectly ordinary at first glance, elegant and decorative, designed to complement the wearer without drawing suspicion. Yet Poirot noticed something subtle, a faint powder, almost invisible to the naked eye, clinging to the interior lining. He leaned closer, inhaling the slight bitter scent, familiar to him from rare toxins studied over years of experience. A rare and potent poison had been applied to the mask, intended to kill without visible injury, a method both elegant and insidious. The elegance of method, yes, Poirot said quietly, matches the cunning of the criminal. One must think like the murderer, yes. How to hide one's intention in plain sight? The implications were immediate. The mask had been delivered to Sir Reginald, placed upon his face during the masquerade, and the toxin absorbed through contact, perhaps inhaled, perhaps via slight abrasion on the skin. The murderer had relied on the confusion of the ball, the anonymity provided by costumes, and the distraction of music and dance. Poirot noted the perfection of the method, subtle, effective, almost imperceptible to anyone untrained in detection. Poirot then considered access. Who had opportunity to handle the masks before distribution? Only the household staff and perhaps a very few guests trusted to assist in preparation. Yet the precision required suggested intimate knowledge of the method and the rare poison used. This was no act of improvisation, it was carefully planned. The detective began his interviews anew, this time with a sharper focus on opportunity and capability. Mr. Adrian Forsyth admitted to handling his mask only briefly, but his reaction suggested nervousness beyond mere grief. Miss Vivienne Caro, when questioned about her own mask, seemed unusually attentive, tracing the edges with delicate fingers, though denying any unusual handling. The foreign gentleman, elusive and precise, claimed only to have collected his mask upon entering, but his evasive manner and previous secrecy made him a candidate for deeper scrutiny. Poirot's observations were meticulous. He examined the masks themselves, the distribution process, the storage prior to the ball. He noted the faint residue of powder on a tray near the servant's station, the subtle fingerprints that indicated multiple people had touched the masks. Poirot's mind worked like a loom, weaving together threads of evidence invisible to ordinary eyes. Each detail, the faint scent of the poison, the placement of objects, the reactions of individuals, spoke volumes when considered together. Meanwhile, new information began to emerge from interviews with the staff. A maid admitted, reluctantly, that she had noticed Sir Reginald's mask appeared slightly different when collected, a subtle change in weight and texture. The footman recalled moving the mask at the last moment, handing it directly to Sir Reginald. Yet no one had noticed the faint residue that would prove fatal. Poirot filed these accounts carefully, aware that each discrepancy could be a deliberate misdirection. Red herrings abounded. Several guests had motives that seemed compelling at first glance: Forsyth's dispute over investments, Caro's potential financial exposure, even Lady Winifred's subtle anxiety. Yet none had presented evidence of action. Poirot understood that murderers often rely on distractions, ensuring that innocent motives draw attention away from their true intention. The real culprit, he knew, had created confusion while orchestrating the act with patience and precision. As he walked the corridors, Poirot reflected on human psychology. Murderers of this kind, sophisticated and meticulous, often revealed their nature in tiny behaviors, the way they avoided direct eye contact, the subtle overcompensation of politeness, the nervous habit of adjusting clothing or accessories. Each gesture, Poirot knew, was a thread to follow. By late afternoon, Poirot had reconstructed the sequence of the evening in his mind. The masks had been collected and distributed carefully, the poisoned mask placed in Sir Reginald's hands just prior to his arrival in the hall. The dance, the music, and the revelry provided cover. At some critical moment, the mask had been applied to his face, the poison delivered invisibly. The murderer had relied not on strength or violence, but on elegance, timing, and human distraction. Poirot convened a small gathering of the key household members and guests, speaking quietly yet firmly. "Miss Amos," he began, "we see now the method, the mask. The elegance of this crime is subtle, but precise. One must consider who had the knowledge, the opportunity, and the will to execute such an act. And one must not be deceived by appearances or emotion. The smallest gesture, the faintest trace, is often decisive. He allowed the room to absorb the statement, observing reactions with unerring precision. Forsyth's shoulders tensed, Caro's eyes flickered momentarily, Lady Winifred's hands trembled ever so slightly. Even the foreign gentleman's posture, rigid as ever, betrayed the faintest unease. These observations were invaluable. They confirmed suspicions and narrowed the field of inquiry, even without explicit admissions. As evening descended once again over Garrick Manor, Poirot retreated to a quiet study, the mask in hand. He examined it repeatedly, noting the pattern of residue, the points of contact, the subtle fingerprints. He reflected on the genius and audacity of the murderer, someone who had calculated every move, anticipated every diversion, and relied upon human behavior to mask their intent. Yet Poirot remained confident. He murmured softly, adjusting his cravat with his habitual precision, the threads are here, the clues are visible, and soon, very soon, the tapestry shall be complete. The small grey cells will illuminate the path, as always. Patience, precision, and observation, these are the weapons, Miss Amos. And they shall succeed. By the night's end, Poirot had drawn a detailed diagram of the library, marked the precise positions of guests, masks, and objects, and recorded every observed nuance. The poison had been revealed, the method understood, and yet the identity of the murderer remained carefully concealed. Every subtlety mattered, and Poirot knew that only through careful cross-examination, psychological insight, and the patient application of logic would the truth emerge. For now, the puzzle had grown more intricate, the threads more entwined. But Poirot, with his customary elegance and unshakable calm, was ready. The poisoned mask was merely one piece of the grand design, a clue to be followed, a pattern to be discerned, and a secret to be revealed in due course. And he knew, with the quiet certainty of genius, that the murderer's confidence would soon falter beneath the weight of observation and reason. Chapter 6: Red Herrings and Revelations. The morning following the discovery of the poisoned masquerade mask was filled with a tense, almost oppressive stillness. Garrick Manor, usually a house of warmth and laughter, now seemed a place of quiet suspicion, where each footstep echoed ominously against the marble floors. Hercule Poirot, ever composed and deliberate in movement, walked through the halls with careful attention, his mind alert to the subtlest of clues. The threads of the mystery were becoming increasingly complex, and he knew that the most inconspicuous details could prove decisive. Poirot began the day by reviewing the accounts and interviews he had already conducted. The guest statements, while polite and composed, contained subtle inconsistencies, slight hesitations, and minor contradictions. He noted that human beings, even when careful, rarely maintain perfect control over every detail of speech and gesture. It was in these small lapses that truth often revealed itself. First, he summoned Mr. Adrian Forsyth. The young man had been nervously observed at the masquerade, and his interactions with Sir Reginald had suggested a potential motive. Forsyth entered the library, his expression anxious, yet attempting to maintain composure. "Monsieur Forsyth," Poirot began, "I require a precise account of your actions after the moment you received your mask. Please be exact. Even the smallest detail, walking, conversation, gestures, may be significant." Forsyth swallowed, fingers nervously adjusting his cravat. I spent most of the evening mingling. I tried to avoid confrontation. I spoke briefly with Sir Reginald, yes, but only to smooth over our earlier disagreement. After that, I remained in the ballroom, observing the guests. Poirot observed the slight hesitation in Forsyth's voice, the way his eyes darted to the window, then quickly back. "And yet," Poirot said gently, "there are indications that you may have entered the library at a later time. Footprints suggest movement not accounted for in your statement. Might you clarify?" Forsyth's face flushed. I went to check on a spilled drink near the far corner, nothing more. I could not, harm him. His voice, though hurried, was sincere in its urgency. Poirot noted the reaction, filing it with care. Truth and guilt often mirrored one another in gesture and tone, but the subtle evidence suggested Forsyth's fear was genuine rather than deceit. Next, Poirot turned to Miss Vivienne Caro, the actress whose gestures and positioning at the ball had suggested strategic calculation. She entered with an air of controlled elegance, a faint smile masking any inattention. "Miss Caro," Poirot said, "I must ask you about the moment you received your mask. Did you notice anything unusual?" Her smile remained, but her eyes flickered. "Unusual? I noticed nothing. The masks were all distributed as planned. I wore mine as instructed and mingled." Poirot inclined his head slightly, studying her expressions with unwavering focus. "And yet, madam, there are reports from the staff of a minor dispute concerning the masks, a disagreement in handling. Do you recall such an event?" Miss Caro hesitated, fingers tracing the edge of her gown. "There may have been a slight disagreement about placement, if a trivial matter. I assure you, it had no significance." Her voice was precise, but Poirot noted the fleeting tension around her eyes. This was a clue, a detail intended to mislead, perhaps, or to conceal a deeper truth. As the morning wore on, Poirot continued his methodical examination of other guests and staff. He noted that the foreign gentleman had maintained a careful distance from others, his mask remaining in place until after Sir Reginald's death. His evasiveness and precise movement suggested both caution and knowledge. Poirot filed these observations mentally, knowing they could be vital when connecting threads later. Among the staff, a young maid provided a curious revelation. She admitted to noticing a letter left in the library, apparently misplaced during the evening's activities. Though its contents were vague, it mentioned Sir Reginald and a financial matter, evidence of possible tension with other guests. Poirot examined the letter carefully. Its existence suggested motive, yet it could also be a deliberate misdirection, a red herring intended to divert attention from the true perpetrator. Poirot paused for a moment, reflecting on the psychology of misdirection. He murmured, "Murderers are cunning. They rely upon distraction, on the eyes of the untrained observer being led astray. Red herrings are the artist's brush, painting false trails to obscure the truth." He then examined the placement of objects in the library, noting again the slight smudge on the Persian rug, the glass with residual odor, and the candlestick toppled in apparent accident. Each element had the potential to mislead, yet, when considered together, a pattern began to emerge, a sequence of deliberate, precise actions orchestrated by someone both intelligent and patient. By mid-afternoon, Poirot convened a small gathering of key guests for further observation. He observed, without immediate accusation, the subtle reactions each displayed. Forsyth fidgeted with his cufflinks, avoiding eye contact. Miss Caro adjusted her mask repeatedly, her smile slightly strained. Lady Winifred clasped her hands, her posture rigid, yet her eyes betrayed unease. Even the foreign gentleman, standing near the window, shifted slightly as Poirot's gaze settled upon him. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, speaking slowly and deliberately, "we have observed behavior, we have noted gestures, we have collected statements. And yet, we must be wary of distraction. Not every apparent clue is true. The human mind, when confronted with tragedy, will create narratives, some deliberate, some unconscious, to protect or deceive." He allowed the words to hang in the air, studying the subtle shifts in expression. Poirot knew that by highlighting the possibility of misdirection, the guilty party might reveal themselves through overcompensation, nervous gestures, or subtle errors. In a particularly telling moment, Poirot examined the crimson mask itself, once again. He noted the slight trace of residue on the interior, the faint fingerprint pattern, and the distribution method. "The elegance of method," he said softly, "is not merely in the act of murder, but in the deception surrounding it. The murderer relies upon confidence, human distraction, and the beauty of concealment. The red herrings were numerous: Forsyth's nervousness, Caro's careful manipulation of attention, Lady Winifred's anxiety, the mysterious foreign gentleman's evasiveness, the misplaced letter suggesting financial motive. Each appeared suspicious in isolation, yet Poirot knew that truth would be revealed only when the entire mosaic was considered. As evening approached, Poirot reflected quietly in the library. He had begun to untangle the web of misdirection, separating genuine clues from those intended to mislead. He considered each motive, each opportunity, and each subtle behavioral trait. Every thread, once isolated and examined, began to form a coherent pattern, a pattern that would eventually expose the murderer's identity. Poirot's mind, ever active, turned over the puzzle continuously. "Patience, observation, and logic," he murmured, adjusting his cravat, "these are the instruments of justice." The murderer may believe themselves clever, but no deception, however sophisticated, can withstand the persistent application of the small grey cells. By nightfall, Poirot had documented every observation, every inconsistency, every subtle clue and potential red herring. The guests retired for the evening, the mansion settling into quiet anticipation. Yet Poirot, serene and composed, felt the thrill of approaching clarity. The threads of deception were now tangible, the pattern slowly emerging. The day had been one of revelations, but also of misdirection, a labyrinth of human behavior, false trails, and concealed motives. Poirot knew that the next stages of the investigation would require careful questioning, cross-referencing statements, and continued observation of the guests. Yet he remained confident. The murderer's cunning, while considerable, could not outmatch his methodical logic and psychological insight. As he gazed at the fireplace, where subtle smudges and traces of activity remained from the previous evening, Poirot allowed a small, satisfied smile. The red herrings had served their purpose, but their existence only sharpened the clarity of truth. The puzzle was becoming solvable, the web of deception ready to unravel. And when it did, Poirot knew, justice would be delivered with precision and inevitability. Chapter 7: The Confrontation. The evening of the seventh day dawned with a chill that seemed to seep into every corner of Garrick Manor. The manor itself, magnificent yet imposing, seemed to loom over its occupants like a silent witness to the recent tragedy. Hercule Poirot, dressed impeccably in his dark suit and perfectly folded cravat, walked the grand corridors with calm determination. His small grey cells had been engaged tirelessly for days, weaving together fragments of observation, subtle gestures, and physical evidence into a tapestry that was slowly beginning to take shape. Poirot had called for a private gathering of the remaining guests and household staff in the Grand Library, a room now familiar as the scene of the crime. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with anticipation and unspoken anxiety. The guests took their seats in cautious silence, exchanging subtle glances, each wondering what the detective had discovered. Poirot's manner was serene, yet there was an unmistakable intensity in his eyes, the quiet authority of a man about to illuminate the truth. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, his voice measured and deliberate, "we are gathered not merely to discuss events, but to illuminate the hidden threads that connect what has occurred. It is often in the smallest detail that the largest truth is revealed. And it is my duty to uncover that truth." He allowed a brief pause, letting the words sink in, before proceeding. "So Reginald Thorne was, alas, taken from us by an act both subtle and deliberate. A mask, a crimson mask, adorned with gold embroidery, served as the instrument of his demise. Applied during the masquerade, it carried a rare poison, imperceptible to the untrained eye, yet deadly in its effects." Gasps rippled quietly through the room. Some guests stiffened, others exchanged anxious looks. Poirot's gaze swept slowly over each face, noting reactions with precision. The tightening of a jaw, a flicker of unease in the eyes, a hand brushing nervously over a sleeve. The elegance of method, Poirot continued softly, is matched only by the cunning of the individual who orchestrated it. And yet, even the most meticulous plan leaves traces, subtleties that betray intention. He moved deliberately around the library, pointing to various pieces of evidence, the Persian rug with slight impressions from hurried movement, the faint residue of poison on the mask, the candlestick toppled in distraction, and a misplaced letter suggesting financial tensions. Each item, he explained, was not merely incidental but part of a carefully constructed tableau, designed to mislead the observer. Poirot then turned his attention to the guests directly. We must consider opportunity, motive, and the capacity to execute this act. Every individual present had the opportunity, to some degree, but only one had the combination of knowledge, skill, and access required. He began with Mr. Adrian Forsyth, his young hands clasped tightly before him, his posture betraying anxiety despite his attempts at composure. Monsieur Forsyth, Poirot said, you had disagreements with Sir Reginald over investments. Yet your gestures, your words, your behavior during the masquerade reveal fear, yes, but not guilt. The small grey cells reveal sincerity in your nervousness. You did not commit this act, though your worry is understandable. Forsyth exhaled, visibly relieved, though tension lingered in his shoulders. Poirot's gaze then shifted to Miss Vivienne Caro, her poised elegance slightly strained under scrutiny. Madame Caro, he said, your family's financial matters were, indeed, under Sir Reginald's consideration. Yet your gestures, calculated, yes, but not indicative of lethal intent, suggest concern rather than action. You observed and strategized, but did not participate in the act itself. Caro's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes momentarily narrowing, but she did not speak. Poirot's observation of subtle expressions, he knew, was as effective as questioning, for guilt often betrays itself in the smallest details. The foreign gentleman, who had remained largely unobserved, shifted slightly in his chair. Poirot's sharp gaze fell upon him. And you, monsieur, careful, evasive, observant. Yet, while your manner aroused suspicion, your presence was merely that of a cautious observer. Your careful distance and methodical movements demonstrate prudence, but not culpability. The room grew quieter, the weight of anticipation pressing down upon each occupant. Poirot allowed the silence to linger before delivering the most crucial insight. The truth, Miss Amos, is seldom hidden from the observant eye. It is not in the obvious disputes, the theatrical gestures, or even the carefully concealed glances that the murderer is revealed. No, it is in the subtle manipulation of attention, the clever orchestration of misdirection, and the precise application of knowledge and access. He paused, letting the word sink in, then produced the crimson mask. This mask, Poirot explained, holding it delicately, was the instrument of murder. Its design, its handling, the trace of poison, each element was exploited by someone intimately familiar with both its use and the behavior of those around them. Consider the logistics, only one person had both the access to place the mask and the knowledge to apply the poison in such a manner. Poirot's gaze swept across the room, fixing on Lady Winifred Garrick, whose hands were clasped tightly, knuckles pale. A faint tremor betrayed the anxiety she had fought to conceal. Madam, Poirot said softly, the tension you have displayed, the care you have taken to maintain appearances, and the subtle inconsistencies in your statements, point to one truth: you were aware of the mask's danger. Not merely aware, but the orchestrator of its application. The threads, when followed carefully, lead to you. Gasps erupted. Lady Winifred's eyes widened, a flash of disbelief crossing her face. Moi? Impossible. I had no reason. Poirot held up a hand, gentle but firm. Patience, madam. Observe closely, the truth is revealed not in anger or denial, but in the accumulation of detail. Your motive was indeed hidden in plain sight, the fear that Sir Reginald would uncover financial mismanagement, the desire to protect your reputation and household, the subtle orchestration of events to maintain appearances. The mask was a perfect instrument, elegant, subtle, and tragically effective. He laid out the sequence of events with deliberate precision: the preparation of the masks, the moment of distribution, the subtle manipulation of staff and guests, the use of a rare poison, and the careful timing that exploited the distraction of the masquerade. Each action, Poirot explained, was deliberate and calculated. The evidence was now undeniable. Lady Winifred's composure faltered, her hand shaking as the weight of exposure settled upon her. The foreign gentleman, Forsyth, and Miss Carrow watched silently, their early attention giving way to a quiet astonishment at Poirot's revelation. The room seemed to hold its breath, the final act of the drama imminent. Why, Lady Winifred?" Miss Carrow whispered, unable to contain her shock. Poirot's eye softened, though his precision remained absolute. "Ah, my dear, human nature is complex. Fear, ambition, and the desire to control one's world often lead to actions otherwise unthinkable. Lady Winifred, in your fear and desire to protect your household, you committed an act both clever and tragic. And yet, as always, the smallest details, the tremor of a hand, the misplacement of an object, the faint trace of poison, betrayed you." Lady Winifred's shoulders slumped, the mask of composure shattered. Poirot, observing with characteristic elegance, allowed a moment of silence to pass, as though permitting the gravity of the revelation to settle over the room. "The web is now clear," Poirot concluded, "and the threads lead to a single point. Justice, though delayed, is inevitable when guided by patience, observation, and the small grey cells." For the first time since the tragedy, the tension in the library seemed to ease slightly. The truth, painstakingly uncovered, cast a definitive light upon the shadowed events of the masquerade. Poirot's methodical brilliance had, once again, unravelled the complex tapestry of human deceit. And as the guests and staff absorbed the revelation, Poirot, serene and composed, reflected quietly that the final step, the formal resolution and explanation of every subtle clue, would follow. The murderer had been identified, the sequence of events laid bare, and only the final act remained, the explanation that would leave no thread of doubt. Chapter 8: The Final Revelation. The grand library of Garrick Manor, once vibrant with the laughter and elegance of masquerade, now carried the weight of anticipation and silent dread. The evening had fallen, and the manor's shadows seemed to deepen around the assembled guests. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in dress and bearing, moved with the calm precision of a man whose small grey cells had pieced together every fragment of mystery. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, his voice steady and refined, "we have traversed a labyrinth of deceit, distraction, and subtle intention. Yet, as is always the case, truth, though it may hide behind masks, misdirection, and human artifice, reveals itself to patient observation and reasoned deduction." The assembled guests, including the relieved yet astonished Mr. Adrian Forsyth, the composed but watchful Miss Vivienne Carrow, the foreign gentleman whose keen eye had followed events with careful discretion, and Lady Winifred Garrick, now pale and tense, listened intently. Poirot's reputation for brilliance preceded him, and even those involved in the tragic events felt the weight of his presence. Poirot began with the sequence of the masquerade. Sir Reginald Thorne, a man of influence, intelligence, and, alas, enemies, met his untimely demise not by accident, but by a subtle and deliberate act. The instrument of death was a crimson masquerade mask, delivered during the ball, carrying a rare and potent poison applied with precision. The poison, invisible to the naked eye and designed to act slowly, allowed the act to remain undetected until the consequences were tragically irreversible. He paused to allow the significance to settle in. Yet, Miss Amos, method alone does not solve a mystery. We must consider the human motives, the desires, the fears that led to this act. We must consider opportunity and knowledge, and above all, the subtleties of behavior that reveal intent. Poirot's gaze swept the room with precise focus, noting reactions carefully. Forsyth's shoulders relaxed slightly, Carrow's composure remained elegant but alert, and the foreign gentleman's eyes followed every subtle gesture. Lady Winifred, however, sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly, a faint tremor betraying her inner conflict. "Consider," Poirot continued, "the opportunity to deliver the poisoned mask. Only one person had the access, the knowledge, and the ability to manipulate events unnoticed. The distribution of the masks was tightly controlled. Staff were observed and instructed, and Sir Reginald himself relied upon the mask's elegance to disguise the moment of action. But the traces left behind, slight smudges, misplaced objects, the faintest odor of poison, and the careful orchestration of attention, reveal the hand of the orchestrator. He approached Lady Winifred slowly, placing the mask gently on the table before her. "Madam, the evidence points with certainty to one individual, yourself. Your motives, though rooted in fear and the desire to protect your household and reputation, led you to commit an act both clever and tragically effective. The threads, your gestures, the minor inconsistencies in statements, your careful orchestration, converge upon you as the source of this act." Lady Winifred's hands trembled as she rose, her composure finally breaking. I only wanted to protect the family," she whispered, voice quivering. "Sir Reginald, he was going to expose errors in the estate's accounts. I did not think. I didn't mean for him to die." Poirot nodded gently, his voice calm but resolute. "Ah, madam, intention and consequence are not always aligned. You acted with calculation, yes, but the fatal outcome, though perhaps unintended, cannot be undone. Yet, as always, the truth emerges through observation, logic, and the relentless pursuit of detail." He then laid out the full sequence of the evening with meticulous precision. The masks were prepared in advance, the crimson mask destined for Sir Reginald. A rare poison was applied, carefully measured to ensure lethality while remaining imperceptible. The delivery was executed during the ball, when the distraction of music, dance, and conversation would divert attention. Minor disruptions, the candlestick toppled, slight disturbances of the rug, were used to mask the moment of application. Each guest and staff member, while seemingly performing ordinary actions, became part of the stage upon which this tragedy unfolded. Poirot paused, allowing the weight of his explanation to resonate. The red herrings, the disputes with Mr. Forsyth, the financial concerns of Miss Carrow, the distant vigilance of the foreign gentleman, were all distractions, deliberately or coincidentally aligned to conceal the true culprit. The careful observer, however, notices what is deliberately hidden in plain sight, the orchestration of attention, the subtle deviations in behavior, the faint traces that remain when one believes nothing is observed. He gestured to the mask again. "This, Miss Amis, is the key instrument. The traces of residue, the unique positioning, and the precise handling reveal knowledge and intent. The murderer relied upon human distraction and confidence, yet even confidence leaves evidence. And it is through such evidence that justice, though delayed, becomes inevitable." Poirot then turned to each guest, his voice imbued with quiet authority. "Mr. Forsyth, your fear and nervousness, though understandable, were truthful expressions of concern. Miss Carrow, your elegance and calculated observation did not conceal guilt. The foreign gentleman, while attentive and cautious, did not participate in the act. Each of you, though embroiled in tension and suspicion, was innocent of the deliberate act of murder." The detective then addressed Lady Winifred once more. "Madam, you must now face the consequences of your actions. Yet, even as we observe justice, it is crucial to understand the human nature behind the deed, the fear, the ambition, and the desire to maintain control. These elements, though familiar to us all, can lead to tragic outcomes when acted upon without restraint." Lady Winifred, her voice barely audible, nodded, tears streaming down her face. The weight of her actions, combined with the precision of Poirot's deductions, had left no avenue for denial. The room, once heavy with suspense, now seemed to exhale collectively, the revelation bringing both relief and solemnity. Poirot continued, his voice softer now, almost reflective. Ms. Amis, mysteries such as this remind us that the most subtle actions, the smallest gestures, and the quietest decisions often carry the greatest consequences. Observation, patience, and the small grey cells allow us to unravel the most intricate webs. And in doing so, we reveal not only the truth of events, but the truth of human nature itself. He looked around the library one last time, eyes resting briefly on the portraits lining the walls, each gazing silently upon the scene. Justice is served not merely by identification of the act, but by understanding the forces that led to it. And so, while we mourn the loss of Sir Reginald, we also acknowledge the resolution of the intricate puzzle laid before us. The guests, still absorbing the gravity of Poirot's revelation, remained silent, their faces reflecting a mixture of astonishment, relief, and solemn contemplation. Even the staff, previously tense and wary, seemed to relax slightly, the clarity of truth replacing the uncertainty that had hung over the house for so many days. Finally, Poirot allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction, adjusting his cravat with habitual precision. "Ah, Miss Amis," he murmured softly, "the mystery is concluded. The threads, once tangled and obscured by human fear and misdirection, have been drawn together. The truth is revealed, as always, by patience, observation, and the application of reason. Justice, though it may be delayed, is achieved." As the evening drew to a close, Garrick Manor settled into an uneasy quiet. The masquerade, once a symbol of elegance and celebration, had become the stage for tragedy and revelation. Yet, through the brilliance of Hercule Poirot, the intricacies of human behavior, the subtle evidence, and the precise application of logic had illuminated the truth. The mystery was resolved, the murderer unmasked, and the delicate threads of intrigue finally untangled. And so, the story of Sir Reginald Thorne's death concluded, not with confusion, but with clarity, as Hercule Poirot's unparalleled skill once again demonstrated that no deception, however clever, can withstand the relentless power of the small grey cells.